Welcome to episode 4 of the Grace Totem podcast. Thank you for tuning in to our channel. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our content.
Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're really getting into it. We're exploring the book of Genesis, the early Old Testament stuff.
Right.
And we've got some, honestly, pretty thought-provoking material. It's mainly from a discussion with Philip Shipman.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal here is to kind of unpack some surprising connections, maybe some interpretations you haven't heard that might give you a fresh angle on these foundational stories, especially if you're, maybe newer to studying the Bible.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these ancient texts, they seem simple on the surface, but when you start looking from different angles, wow, they just open up so much debate.
Totally. Okay, so let's dive right in. Eden. The garden, you've got the two trees, right? The tree of knowledge of good and evil, everyone knows that one.
A famous one.
But then there's this other idea, the tree of life. Maybe it wasn't just a tree. The source floats this idea of it being like a portal, an Einstein-Rosen bridge even.
A gateway, yeah.
Yeah.
A pretty out there concept, but intriguing.
And then the rule, just one. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge, that's it.
Yeah.
What strikes you about that initial setup, just those elements?
Well, it immediately sets up boundaries, doesn't it? And these two trees, they have such different potential roles. The restriction on a knowledge tree, it's all about choice, free will.
Right.
And the life tree, if it is a gateway.
Well, that suggests a really direct line, maybe, between humans and the divine realm.
Okay, then boom, the fall. They eat the fruit, and instantly things change. Death enters the picture, separation from God.
The consequences are immediate.
But here's where the perspective gets really interesting. The source suggests this wasn't like plan B for God. It wasn't a shock. The idea is the Trinity knew. Because, well, for genuine love, you need free will. And free will means this could happen. So the backup plan, Christ's sacrifice, was already conceived.
So foreknowledge, not surprise, but disappointment.
Exactly. Like a father's heartbreak, the
Oh.
source says. Missing his kid, Not anger necessarily, but deep sadness. How does that land with you? It really reframes it, doesn't it? It shifts the focus from just divine anger or punishment to God's love and foresight. That sacrifice being planned from the start suggests this constant thread of reconciliation.
Yeah.
God wanting that real relationship.
Okay, now let's tackle something, well, pretty controversial. The serpent.
Ah, yes, the serpent.
What if it wasn't a literal snake? What if serpent was a title? The source uses Bashan, like Pharaoh or President today, a title signifying a powerful being.
Okay, so a figure of authority, possibly a fallen one.
And here's the twist. The illicit union with Eve. Maybe it wasn't just a chat. Maybe it was physical. That's what the source puts forward. Thoughts on that reading?
Well, that definitely takes us far from the Sunday school version. It's complex theologically. Calling it Bashan, a title, opens that door. A more powerful, maybe sinister entity involved directly with Eve.
And the consequences of that proposed union also presented very differently. It suggested this introduced the flesh as something distinct from our real self, our soul.
That's a big theological point. Contentious, for sure.
Yeah, the idea being, maybe when Jesus looks at us, he sees the perfected soul, not this fallen nature, the flesh. And right after this supposed union, God declares war, but not directly on Eve, on the Bashan. It kicks off what the source calls a seed war between the offspring, the lineage tied to these negative forces, these fallen angels maybe, and Eve's offspring.
So a spiritual conflict right from the start.
Doesn't that just completely reframe the whole Old Testament if you look at it that way?
It really does. Suddenly, the Old Testament isn't just a history of Israel. It becomes the story of this cosmic battle.
Yeah.
The enemy constantly trying to mess with God's plan, specifically trying to stop the Messiah's lineage.
Which explains why the line is revealed so slowly, maybe, to protect it.
That would make sense strategically. Keep the target hidden as long as possible from these hostile powers.
And the story keeps going. Before the flood, let's call them negative angels. They're supposedly sharing knowledge with humans.
Technology, power.
Right. But it comes at a cost. Morality gets traded away. It feels oddly familiar, doesn't it? Trading ethics for advancement or power.
It's a timeless theme, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then you get the Nephilim, this really controversial idea, offspring from unions between these negative angels and humans.
The source mentioned Michael Heiser's work here, Unseen Realm, looking at the Benai Elohim in Psalm 82.
Which means sons of God in Hebrew, right? Or divine beings.
Exactly. And the interpretation is that these unions were a direct attempt to corrupt human DNA. to pollute the line so the Messiah couldn't be born truly human, creating hybrids.
Man, that makes the flood seem even more drastic, but necessary from that perspective. God's heartbreak is emphasized again, having to wipe the slate clean almost, saving just Noah's family, the pure line, and the animals.
The severity.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of just how pervasive the corruption must have been, and the choice of water for the flood. Interesting, too.
Okay, so post-flood, the world resets, kinda. But these negative influences, they don't just vanish, according to this view.
So lurk.
We hear about ziggurats in modern Iraq, described as places where women might seek unions with these beings, again, for power, resulting in maybe more genetic alterations, giants even.
It suggests this struggle just continued, didn't stop with the flood.
But we also get the Noachic covenant, God's promise to Noah, to all humanity, and sacrifice becomes more formalized, right, as a way to deal with sin.
Yeah, building on that precedent from the garden, God giving Adam and Eve skins, and Cain and Abel's offerings later. It sets the stage.
Which leads us eventually to Moses and the law, all 613 commandments.
Right, the Mosaic Law.
The source suggests this wasn't totally new information, but more like, okay, we have a huge group of people now. They're going into a new land. They need detailed rules for society, structure.
Practical guidance for a nation being formed. And you also get the idea of corporate forgiveness, atonement for the whole community.
Yeah, symbolized by the Ark of the Covenant, right. What's the big deal about that shift? Going from maybe more direct interaction to this structured law.
Well, the law gave the Israelites a very clear framework for their specific time and place. And that corporate forgiveness idea, with the ark at the center, it stressed the community aspect of their relationship with God. The nation needed a way to be made right.
And central to that is blood sacrifice. It's kind of mysterious, isn't it? Why blood? Why is it required for atonement, but you're forbidden to eat it? It's called the life force.
It's a deep, deep theological thread through the whole Bible. Blood representing life itself.
The source even throws out speculation. Maybe different blood types could be linked to negative influences, though it admits that's very uncertain.
Yeah, that's definitely speculative.
Okay.
But the core idea, the sanctity of life, and that a life must be offered for atonement, that's undeniably central.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. Tower of Babel, usually we think bad humans trying to reach heaven, God stops them. Simple.
Pride, rebellion, the standard interpretation.
But this source offers another take. Maybe it wasn't inherently evil defiance. Maybe it was an attempt to build a portal, a gateway.
Like the tree of life idea, maybe, trying to connect realms.
Yeah, and maybe not even in Babylon. Could have been in Syria, the source suggests. How did that view change things?
It makes it less about just human arrogance, maybe, more about misdirected ambition, trying to achieve connection through their own technology, perhaps, instead of through God's ways. Still problematic, but different.
And here's another little nugget, a twist on a familiar story. Esau. We know the story with Jacob, the birthright, the blessing.
Yeah, Esau the hunter, Jacob the quieter one.
What if Esau's hunting wasn't just for food? What if he was hunting Nimrod?
Nimrod, the mighty hunter, builder of cities, often seen as rebellious against God.
Exactly. What if Esau was actively opposing Nimrod? Taking a stand against that kind of evil adds a completely different layer to Esau, doesn't it?
Wow, yeah, that makes him seem, well, almost heroic in a way. Not just the guy who sold his birthright for stew. It suggests hidden conflicts running underneath the main narrative.
So all these interpretations, they seem to circle back to this idea of God's law and human freedom. Like, maybe the reason there were so few rules in Eden initially
Just the one big one.
was because God wanted humanity to freely choose him, to love and obey out of choice, not compulsion.
It speaks to that desire for authentic relationship, right? Based on love and trust. Not just following a giant rule book from day one, a delicate balance between guidance and freedom.
Then eventually Jesus arrives, Messiah, and he brings the new covenant.
A major shift.
The rules boil down to love God, love your neighbor. He says he came to fulfill the Old Testament law, not abolish it. His words become the final authority. How does this new covenant connect back to that whole seed war idea we discuss?
Well, Jesus represents the ultimate victory in that war, doesn't he? He's the fulfillment of the lineage the enemy was trying to stop. And the focus shifts. It's less about external rules and rituals, more about an internal transformation. Love as the driving force. It offers a new way, a direct way, back to God.
But the war isn't over. According to the source, even after Jesus ascends, the enemy doesn't just give up.
Still fighting? Yeah.
Now the goal shifts. If they can't stop the Messiah, maybe they can divide his followers, create chaos, division among humans. Why? To gather forces for the end times, for Armageddon.
That's the implication. Bolster their own side for that final confrontation.
And this throws the whole Antichrist concept into a different light, too. Maybe it's not just one person. The source mentions symbolic beasts, one from the earth, one from the sea, representing powers, systems, and a false prophet figure.
Yeah, interpreting those apocalyptic figures symbolically rather than just literally as one single future dictator.
And here's a really eerie thought from the source. Remember the flood wiped out land life mostly?
But not sea life.
Exactly. Aquatic life survived. Could that hint at hidden influences? Things operating from realms we don't see, maybe oceanic depths. It's kind of sci-fi, but...
It definitely stretches the imagination. But it fits that narrative of an ongoing, persistent conflict happening in dimensions or realms beyond our normal perception. Unseen influences.
Which brings us to some really modern, kind of strange connections the source makes. UFOs.
Okay, here we go.
With all the recent reports, government acknowledgments, the source links this to negative angels giving secret information. Advanced tech cites things like maybe the Nazis getting technology.
Wow, that's a leap.
Yeah, and specific areas mentioned: root cutting, metallurgy, pharmaceuticals. Like, these negative forces taught humanity specific things for their own ends. Provocative, to say the least.
Extremely provocative. It steps way outside traditional theology or history and into, well, conspiracy territory for many. Yeah. But it's part of this alternative framework being presented.
Even Sodom and Gomorrah gets a relook. The usual interpretation focuses on sexual sin, right?
Primarily, yes. In hospitality, too, but mostly the sexual aspect.
This source suggests maybe the primary goal wasn't that, but an attempt to steal power from the angels who visited Lot, like trying to overpower or capture divine beings.
Whoa, so the angels binding the men at the door?
Takes on a different meaning, right? Defending themselves from an assault aimed at capturing their power, it shifts the focus from moral depravity alone to a direct confrontation with the divine.
That's another radical reinterpretation of a well-known story.
And ancient Egypt, the dynasties. Why did some seem relatively short? The source speculates. Maybe different negative angelic influences waxed and waned. Maybe the angelic power diluted in bloodlines over time.
Tying the rise and fall of empires to these supernatural conflicts.
Yeah. And even Jesus' flight to Egypt as a baby, seen as part of this seed war, Herod killing the infants. A direct attack by the enemy trying to eliminate the Messiah, again.
Viewing history through this very specific lens of cosmic warfare, it connects seemingly disparate events.
So bringing it right up to today, the source connects some modern issues like debates around gender identity, suggests this could be the enemy trying to hinder procreation, create more division.
Okay, that's treading on very sensitive ground.
Absolutely. And it's critical, as the source itself emphasizes, to remember God's unconditional love, acceptance for every single person, regardless. But it is trying to place these modern debates within that larger seed war framework. How do we even process that?
Very carefully. I think you have to separate the theological interpretation, this idea of an enemy sowing division, from the reality of individual people's lives and experiences. Grounding it always in God's love, like you said, is key, but it's it's a challenging connection to draw.
Thinking about the end times, Armageddon, the focus in this interpretation isn't believers picking up swords. No. It's about Christ's return, his victory, the role for believers now, unity, love. That's presented as the counter-strategy to the enemy's division tactics.
Like the early church. Their power wasn't political, it was the Holy Spirit. They faced persecution, martyrdom even, as their form of resistance.
Exactly, faith over force. Which then makes you look at something like the Crusades differently. Viewed through this lens, the Crusades look like a major detour, right?
Sure.
Christians seeking earthly power, using military might, maybe forgetting that reliance on faith. The source contrasts it with Jonah and Nineveh. Repentance changed things, not an army.
It's a critique, isn't it? A warning about when faith gets entangled with worldly power structures and violence. A cautionary tale from history.
And even the conquest of Canaan, that's always a tough part of the Old Testament.
Extremely difficult, yeah. God commanding the Israelites to wipe out entire peoples.
This interpretation offers a potential justification, I guess, by suggesting the inhabitants weren't fully human, maybe Nephilim, hybrids, part of that corrupted seed. So removing them was part of cleansing the land for God's people within the context of this seed war.
Again, very controversial interpretation. But it's an attempt to make sense of those difficult passages within this specific framework. That doesn't necessarily make it easy to accept, but it offers a different context.
All this leads to thinking about our place here, you know? On Earth, the source talks about believers being like, well, tabernacling, just dwelling here temporarily. This isn't our final home.
Sojourners, pilgrims, that idea.
Right. And if you see Earth that way, it changes how you view worldly systems, politics. The source even shares a personal perspective, prioritizing spiritual alignment over deep political involvement, trusting God's plan even if, say, bad things happen, like facing threats.
It shifts your priorities, definitely. If this isn't the ultimate reality, then investing everything in its systems might seem less critical.
Yeah.
Your focus becomes more internal.
Okay, last big item, the Ark of the Covenant.
The ultimate mysterious object.
Huge significance. The source poses a hypothetical. If you found it, say you were president, what would you do? Reveal it, secure it. It's believed by some to hold immense power, maybe control of the world.
The ultimate prize, or burden.
But the deeper theological idea presented is about the end times. The beast demanding worship, possibly involving a perversion, a counterfeit of the Ark and what it represents.
So its significance continues right into eschatology, into the final conflict. It remains this incredibly potent symbol of God's presence and covenant, its ultimate fate.
Yeah.
Still debated, speculated about.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, going through Genesis and the early Old Testament with this particular lens, it really shows how these ancient stories can be read in ways that are, frankly, surprising and challenging.
Definitely challenging. It's not the standard reading for many of these events.
Yeah, but this framework, this idea of a seed war, of unseen forces, it does offer a way to connect the dots, maybe make sense of some difficult parts, even if it raises a whole lot of new questions. It certainly invites you, the listener, to maybe go back to these familiar stories and, well, look again. See if there might be deeper layers you missed.
It encourages that ongoing exploration, doesn't it? Never assuming we have it all figured out. These texts have resonated for millennia for a reason. Perhaps they hold more secrets yet.
And here wraps the episode of the Grace Totem Podcast. If you've liked the content, please make sure you drop that like button. Stay tuned with us as we deep dive into the topics, unpacking and unraveling them by subscribing to our channel and clicking on the bell icon so that you get notified when we post new content. Thank you for listening to us. See you soon.